She would be nicknamed the Black Widow. She would go through husbands like I go through cheeseburgers. But it would be husband number 5 that would be the one to not end up escaping her clutches. And when he ends up 6 feet under, all eyes fall on her. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Dr. Darryl Sutorius. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we get started, I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate it. Happy Hanukkah if you celebrated that. Whatever you celebrated, I hope it was good. If you don't celebrate, well, I just hope you had a good time. I'm a very awkward person. Darryl Sutorius was born on March 2nd, 1940 in Columbiana, Ohio. He was the son of a reverend, and I don't have really a whole lot of information about his past or, how he grew up. Later, though, he would go on to marry a woman named Janet, and they would have 4 children together. Their names were Deborah, Rebecca, John, and Christina. Darryl and Janet's marriage, however, would last about 30 years before Darryl began to feel a lack of something. He just felt he was missing something in his life. He just wasn't happy anymore in this particular marriage. His happiness was just sort of faded away. He was starting to feel very lonely within his marriage and in his home. After 30 years, his children were all grown-up adults, kind of, out in the world. So he would eventually separate from her, and it took a couple of years, but they were finally divorced. Darryl was also a very well-respected heart surgeon at a hospital in Cincinnati. His colleagues would say that he was an absolute master at heart surgery. He was one of the absolute best. He would do it with finesse, and there wasn't a problem he couldn't solve. Inside the operating room, he was calm, cool, and collected. However, outside of the operating room, he seemed to be kind of the opposite. He was known to have a bit of a temper. He would lash out sometimes and sort of just get really frustrated with nurses, and some of the nurses were actually kind of afraid of him at times. Not like that he was going to actually hurt them, just that his outbursts were very whoa. And apparently he would have, a bit of a temper at home as well. He was described as someone who was, very moody, and he was a perfectionist. And if he couldn't perfect something, it would really frustrate him. But despite all of that, when it came down to it, Darryl was still a good man. He wouldn't ever hurt anyone. He was a loving father, if not sometimes a bit absent, especially after the divorce. He kind of lost connection with some of his kids, but he still, still maintained a very decent relationship, though, with his kids. And all the while, he is still searching for the one, the true love of his life. That seemed to come in November of 1994. He would use a dating site or a dating service, actually, back then. It would be probably I imagine one of those old-timey dating service videos, the really cringy ones. You should YouTube them because they're hilarious.
Early to bed, early to rise makes a woman healthy, wealthy, and wise. That's why you're wiser than me. It's Stephen.
Hi, I'm Maurice. I'm an executive by day and a wild man by night.
Hi, my name's Monroe. You've probably already noticed that I have incredibly blue eyes.
Hi, my name is Phil. Most of my friends call me Big Phil.
Okay. I like to talk to people deep into the night.
I play guitar.
But through the dating service, he would meet a woman by the name of Dante Sutorius. She was a 44-year-old woman who had also recently been divorced. Dante was a rather petite woman, very small in stature. She had a very soft voice. She just And especially next to Darryl, who was this like giant 6'3", 240 plus pound, just bulk of a man. It looked like an odd pairing at times to some people. They seemed to be opposites in many facets, but as Paula Abdul once told us, opposites attract, or whatever. On the marriage certificate, Dante left her previous marriages off. Basically, she tried to insinuate she really only had the one ex-husband, the recently divorced one. But that wasn't true. Not even close. Darryl was actually her 5th husband. Yeah. Her real name wasn't even Dante. It was actually Della. She said that she changed her name from Della to Dante because the name Della sounded too black. Okay. Not a good look there, Della. Della Faye Hall was her birth name, and she was born on August 8th, 1950. And she was born in Oxier, Kentucky. I'm not sure if I said that right. She had a bit of a rocky childhood, I guess you can say. Her dad passed away when she was just 3 years old. Her mom would remarry like virtually immediately after her husband died, which when she got remarried, that meant that Della now had some new siblings, some stepsisters. Della apparently had her own history of having temper issues. She had actually threatened to kill her stepsisters before, and she allegedly murdered her neighbor's dog. F*** you very much, Della Dante. She made claims that she herself had been abused throughout childhood, but there was never really anyone that could, say that that was true. No one could really corroborate it. She had dropped out of high school, and by age 19, she had married some young guy, and they got pregnant, but they couldn't afford to have a baby. So when the baby was born, they ended up, basically, it went into the foster system. And then shortly after that, Della divorced this first husband. About a year or so later, she married husband number 2, but then they shortly got divorced. By age 44, in 1994, she had been married 4 times and divorced 4 times. Then she met a rich surgeon, and his name was Darryl. Darryl was great to her. He would lavish her with very expensive gifts. He bought her fancy diamonds. He bought her a mink coat. Mink coats. Oh my god, that's such a 90s thing. Are those even still around? Anyway, he treated her like royalty, like she was the queen of the castle. But Darryl, he wasn't really as rich as it kind of seemed he was, because he had to fork over a lot of money, for alimony every month to his ex-wife. He was also putting all of his kids through college, which is very pricey. And then he's spending all sorts of money on his new lady. But apparently he was happy. According to friends, he said, "I found the one." And 4 months into their relationship, they got hitched. Yeah. Dante, or Della, whatever her name is, she would appreciate all the money that he had spent on her because she didn't earn any money herself. She didn't have a job. Ever. Literally. She never had a job. Was never employed. Not really. She was able to use her charm and her good looks to sway multiple men into buying her all the things she needed and giving her money. I wish I had that skill, fellas. Oh, gross. No. The few people who actually saw Darryl and Dante together, and there wasn't really many people who did because he kind of kept her sort of private, they would say that Darryl looked happy, jovial, he looked excited, he looked like life had been breathed back into him. But then Dante looked very standoffish. It looked like she was just sort of there. And she would never really kiss him. She would only give him little pecks on the cheek, especially in public. So it just seemed like One person was happy, the other person was just like, meh. Darryl's oldest daughter would end up getting married, and Darryl wanted to spend like $50,000 and just throw this humongous wedding that, his daughter would never forget. But Dante was like, no, you're not doing that. You're not spending that kind of money on a wedding. No. Sorry. And for some reason, he was convinced by that. And so this created a rift in Darryl's family now. This would then lead to a lot of arguments between Darryl and Dante. There was open discussions about how money was tight all of a sudden. And Darryl started to feel super unhappy now. Both of them are now sleeping in separate bedrooms. Very early, like January of 1996, they started to see a marriage counselor to see if by chance they can fix this. Well, it turns out no. On February 19th, 1996, Darryl would not show up for work. He had a patient who was having a high blood pressure issue. The staff was paging him, and he did not show up to the hospital, even after he was scheduled to be there. And they tried calling him, paging him more. They couldn't get a hold of him at all. He did not call to say he wasn't going to be there. There was no heads up. He was just gone. So, feeling very concerned, the hospital staff would let the police know, like, hey, can you do a welfare check on Dr. Sutorius, because we're concerned. So, the police go to their house. And when they get there, Dante opens the door, and she's like, oh, I haven't seen Darryl in a couple of days. His schedule at work is usually so busy. We don't see each other sometimes. I haven't seen him. So she then lets the police come in the house. She says, yeah, go ahead and search around. That's fine with me. As they're searching around the home, she herself breaks apart from them. She walks downstairs to the basement where Darryl had his own, man cave, if you want to call it that. And all of a sudden, you hear Adelta just screaming out loud, bloody murder. Police run to where she was screaming. She had found Darryl. He had been slumped over on the couch, and there was a gun next to him, and he had a gunshot wound to his head. At first glance, it appeared that this was something he did. This was self-inflicted. But it would take a little while for the coroner to eventually come back with, results of what they did. One of the odd things they found at the crime scene was the fact that there wasn't just one shot fired. There was actually 2 shots fired. Only one of them actually hit him. The other was fired into a pillow kind of nearby where his head was. The strange thing about it is no one can figure out why on earth he would have fired a shot through a pillow and then shot himself. It just didn't really make much sense. They also saw that there was dried blood on the handle, but it looked like someone had grabbed the gun after the blood had dried. And the gun itself had dropped after he supposedly shot himself. So there's no way he would have been able to pull the trigger and then get blood on the handle and then pick it up again, who knows how much long later, because he would already have been dead. There weren't any, usable prints, however, on the gun itself. Police thought it was very odd that Dante didn't hear a gunshot go off in her own home. It was a loud gun, so it's odd that she claimed that she hadn't seen him, didn't look for him, didn't hear a gunshot. It appeared he had been down there for at least a few days because rigor mortis had set in, so this wasn't something that had just happened. They also discovered that the gun that was used to kill Darryl was actually purchased a week prior by Dante. She told police, yeah, that was my gun, and she said she bought it because, quote, I was always afraid that I'm going to wake up and there's someone standing in my room, and so I bought a gun. Girl, same. Yeah, no, for sure. You're obviously a little batshit crazy in your life, but I have the same fears, for sure. And this is when Della / Dante's life came back to bite her in the ass. Her 4 ex-husband says that she was a certified, bona fide, cuckoo-cachoo, wackadoo, whack job. David, her 4th husband, said that it got to a point where she was so verbally abusive that it became very frightening because she had threatened to kill him. So he had to hide the bullets to their gun where she could not find them because he genuinely feared that she was going to shoot him dead. Husband number 3, Gary, said that when he heard about Darryl's death, he's basically like, well, I got off lucky then. I'm very lucky to be alive because that bullet could have been in my head because she was very abusive and threatening to him as well. When she didn't get her way, she would, abuse him. She would attack him. She would accost him. And again, threaten him. One of her ex-husbands said that when, they had gone out to, have lunch with, a colleague, Della, Dante, would be kind of tailing him in her own car, following him wherever he went, basically spied on him. When he would go golfing, she would call the golf course every 15-20 minutes to make sure he was still there because she was a very jealous person and a very controlling person. One of the ex-husbands says that there was an occasion where she put an unloaded gun up to my head and said, "Where are the bullets?" An ex-boyfriend came forward to say that out of jealousy one time, she set his bed on fire. On fire, his bed, which then caused the house to become engulfed in flames and it burnt to the ground. There was not any physical proof, however, to show that she was the one to set the fire. So she was never charged with anything to do with it. All of her ex-husbands and her ex-boyfriends, lovers, they would all tell police that if any of them ever threatened to leave her, ever threatened to walk away, she would become instantly violent and aggressive towards them, to a point where, again, they felt afraid for their lives. She would become downright terrifying. Police would interview friends and colleagues of Darryl's, and towards the end, police would find out that Darryl was telling friends that he actually felt afraid for his life. He felt that Dante would possibly kill him. And he even said, if I wind up dead, Dante did it. Now, in their research and investigation, they would interview, his family, and there was a history of depression with him. He did, in fact, have some, suicidal thoughts when his previous marriage had ended, but obviously he never even attempted it. Dante's own mother and her step-siblings would also go to police and say, listen, Dante killed that man. I mean, they were sure. They're like, she absolutely killed him. She is more than capable of doing it. And they said that Dante is a very dangerous person. Her own family. But police didn't really have much to, in terms of physical evidence, to arrest her for the murder. Because for all they knew at this point, this was a suicide. And that was it. They did, however, were able to arrest her because they found a small little container of cocaine in her bedroom. So she was arrested for that, but then she was bailed out. And then they questioned more people. In particular, one of Darryl's colleagues would say that Darryl was actually on the verge of filing for divorce from Dante. He had actually gotten himself a divorce lawyer, and he told that colleague, I need to get out of this marriage. I've made a mistake. This marriage was not what I should have done. Now, if Darryl divorced Dante, because their marriage was only a few months long, she really wouldn't have gotten much of anything. But if Darryl was dead before the divorce, she would get somewhere around $1 million from our dear old friend life insurance policy. He had one. She was the beneficiary to that. And then Police finally got word from the coroner about what they found on Darryl. First things first, there was not a contact wound where like the gun would have been pressed against his head had he pulled the trigger himself and did this himself. But most importantly, the entry wound to his head was actually the back of his head, right behind one of his ears. And it went through the front. So this was not one of those things where it was put to the side or this way. They're saying that the gun had to have been this direction. They would say that in terms of like, you know, his arm reach, how hard it is to pull the trigger on that particular gun, it would have been physically impossible for Darryl to put the gun in the position where it would have shot him and pull the trigger at the same time. It just wasn't possible. He couldn't do it himself. So someone had to have put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger without him knowing. So with that, and this mountain of circumstantial evidence with, like, you know, Dante's past, her threats, the fact that she was the one to purchase the murder weapon, all of that, they were finally able to then arrest her again and charge her with aggravated murder. At her trial, there would be an onslaught of witnesses, including her own friends and family, who would testify against her. Her ex-husbands testified against her. She had ex-boyfriends who testified against her. All of them painting her as a very scary person, a very violent person who would have outbursts that would put the fear of God into you. And it's almost incredible that no other man has died at her hands before Darryl. There was a bar patron that would testify that that Dante had told this bar patron, "I'm going to kill Darryl. I'm going to find a way to kill him. I'm probably going to poison him." She drunkenly told other people at the bar that she thinks Darryl was cheating on her, that he was going to leave her, and that Darryl had cut me off from all the credit cards. He was taking money out of the bank account so I couldn't spend it. So all that's doing now is creating more of a financial motive as to why she would have done this, not to mention the life insurance policy. In terms of Darryl having an affair, there really was nothing to really say that was a credible accusation. This is a small, unassuming woman with a very soft voice. She looks like everyone's mom, right? So there's no way she could be this monster. But she is. And that's what the prosecution said. That's like the scariest part about her. They nicknamed her the Black Widow. She's like this beautiful thing, but she's also this terrifying evil that could just strike at any moment. And well, she did. But I mean, yeah, you wouldn't guess that this is a woman who's been like physically violent, verbally violent towards 4 ex-husbands and boyfriends, and setting fires to houses, and threatening to murder people, putting guns to people's heads. This is not the type of person you would think. But that's what makes life scary, right? Is that there are plenty of people out there just like Dante / Della that you just would assume wouldn't be this way. But here we go. Now, the prosecution had no physical evidence to prove without a shadow of a doubt that she was the one to pull the trigger and shoot him in the back of the head, because she had no gunshot residue on her hands. I mean, if you think about it, it's been likely days after she shot him and many showers later, many hand washings later. But he also did not have any gunshot residue on his hand. And if she wanted to play this like, well, he did it himself, there's no reason why she would have cleaned his hands. So the fact that he had none on him, that's a pretty damning, more damning evidence, other than he couldn't have pulled the trigger himself. The prosecutors would also use the fact that there was, a second shot fired. They felt that what actually happened was she shot him while he laid on the couch or sat on the couch. And then after that, for some reason, she put the gun into his hand and fired around into the pillow with using his hand. Why? Who knows? And then, the fact that the blood kind of dried on the handle of the gun, none of that really pointed physically to her, again, because there wasn't much physical evidence to show or prove that she actually pulled the trigger. But it did suggest that there was someone else present during the shooting, or, very soon afterwards. But they did have proof that she was the one to purchase the gun. It was her gun. They had all the other evidence, the testimonies, the witness statements, and all of that would just sort of pile on, and the jury wholeheartedly believed that she was a monster, and she was found guilty of aggravated murder. And then she would be sentenced to 23 years to life, which was the maximum punishment she could have gotten for this crime. She would obviously go on to appeal. She would be denied every single time. She was to serve her time at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. And in November of 2010, November 20th, 2010, Della Sutorius passed away in her prison cell from natural causes. I feel pretty confident that they got this right. I mean, I'm a fan of having physical evidence. I love physical evidence. The more the merrier. But if you do have very strong circumstantial evidence, I do feel like sometimes that is enough. Because obviously he didn't do it himself. She was the only one who actually had a motive. His ex-wife wouldn't have, because he was paying her money, and she wasn't on his life insurance policy. Dante was. So Dante had the financial motive. She had the anger issues, the jealousy. It was pretty more than obvious that she was the one to do this, even though they didn't have a lot of physical proof. Her biggest mistake was shooting him in the back of the head. She really wanted this to look like that he did it himself. She wouldn't have done so to the back of his head. There are many other angles she should have done it from, but thankfully she made that mistake, because without it, at that point, without the fact that, this could not have been a suicide, if you didn't have that, then I don't know if there would be enough to convict her, for sure. But that is it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you want to see more cases from me, I have plenty more here on YouTube now, but I also have thousands of them over on TikTok in short form, like 3 minutes or less usually. The link to my TikTok is in my link tree below. It's also just called Making a True Crimerer. I'm close to 3 million followers there. But most of my true crime content now, like new stuff, is going to be pretty much exclusively here. But you can follow that page just in case. Yeah. Secondly, if you have a case you would like me to cover, you can email me at mikey@truecrimerer.com. Please go to my link tree and check my case list first. Look through the names. There's a lot of names. You can search, and if you don't see the name you want me to cover, email me just the name, where it happened, when it happened, and I'll add it to my list. If you do see the name, please don't email it to me, because it's already on there, and I picked my cases at random. And then lastly, if you would like to support me in any way, we do sell merch. I sell like t-shirts and hoodies and a wine glass and whatnot. The link to the merch store is also in the link tree below. My friend Adam, he makes all of the merch himself, and he's the one who does all the shipping, and he will ship internationally. So wherever you are in the world, he will... Don't do that again, Mike. Okay. He will ship it to you. All right, True Crime Maroonies, that is it for today's video. I see you looking at me, you stupid owl. What are you gonna do, kill me? You're gonna swoop in, slash my skull open, then I'll walk up a flight of stairs for some reason, and I'll die? Huh? You fucking piece of shit.